everyone, and I want to welcome Lindsay Wilson today. Welcome to our third in our series on intimate partner violence. I've been saying it incorrectly the whole time, saying interpersonal instead of intimate. So I'm very sorry about that. But we have a very exciting topic today. Lindsay, thank you so much for being here. Let's talk about let's get on to it. So
Yeah. Thanks again for having me. Thank you to everyone who's watching. It's still Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and today I thought we could talk a little bit about sort of red flags and warning signs, because I think that's a topic that maybe people have a lot of questions about. Um, and while certainly, we can't ever sort of totally predict what's going to happen in a relationship, I think it's helpful to maybe have some things to kind of look out for, to maybe um, raise some questions as you're kind of maybe dating, starting a new relationship, things like that.
I think that's a topic everyone can really glom onto, whether you're veterans or not,
Yeah,
because anybody who's in the dating world, it's almost taking a risk these days to date someone without knowing these signs. So, what are the signs and warnings that wise people ought to know about when they're dating?
sure. And well, I'll start just by saying kind of what are the general characteristics of like a healthy relationship, right? So
Mhm.
these are, I guess we'll call them like the green flags, right, that we're looking for. Um, you want to have like open communication, um, respect, trust, and honesty. A relationship that's roughly equal, and certainly these characteristics can vary a little bit, like culturally. Um, you want to still be able to like have your own things, right? You have time away from each other. You have like other friends, other activities. If you're making choices that affect both of you, it's something you can do that's mutual, right? So there's kind of both people involved. And when you're at a point where like finances are involved, that's something that you can be in partnership about. So not necessarily one person calling all the shots. So that's kind of generally like healthy relationship, right? And I think it's helpful to think about it not just like your relationship is good or bad, but sort of on a spectrum, right? So there's kind of healthy at one end, unhealthy in the middle, and abusive on the other end. And certainly, like, I don't think anyone's ever perfectly healthy all the time, right? We're people, we all have our stuff. And certainly, like, conflict comes up no matter what. But then there's some red flags and warning signs that maybe things are getting into the unhealthy or abusive direction.
Some of these warnings are so subtle, though, that
Mhm.
oftentimes many people ignore them or explain them away, like, it's new or whatever. So can you talk about the really subtle signs and the fact that people are so willing to give grace? It's basically giving grace.
Sure.
When does one give grace and when does not?
Mhm.
When does one need to understand
Yeah.
it's a red flag?
I think that's a great way of putting it, right? There are some things that are subtle and some things that I think, aren't like eliminating in and of themselves, right? So like, for example, on my list of red flags, humiliating or embarrassing you in front of other people. And that can look, if someone maybe doesn't know something is embarrassing to you and they embarrass you in front of other people and you say like, "Hey, that was really embarrassing." And they're like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." And they never do it again. That's different than if someone is deliberately trying to humiliate or embarrass you in front of other people. So I think, there's a little bit of nuance to everything. And I think you can, there's a balance between like giving grace and being understanding and also still like kind of maintaining boundaries. Um, some other things that come up that can be subtle, like if someone is like ignoring or excluding you from things, sometimes even the way that like they talk, right? Sometimes a tone of voice, the words they use, like being really sarcastic, that can come off as belittling. Certainly, sarcasm is sometimes people's humor, but like also it can be a way of like belittling the other person. So like those can be more subtle signs.
And those are often explained away as jokes. Oh, I was only
Yeah,
joking. So where does one figure out when someone is having a red flag moment or when they're joking?
Yeah, and I think it does come down to like the example I said before about embarrassing, like, can you communicate about these things, right? Because certainly someone can joke and it still doesn't feel good to you,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like that still hurts my feelings. I don't really like to be talked to that way. And if the other person hears that and they accept that and they're like, oh, okay, I won't do that. That's one thing. If they're like, it's just a joke, get over it, that is something different, right? So I do think that it involves kind of tuning into your own feelings as well, and remembering that those are valid, because certainly minimizing your feelings, that can be like a common tactic, right? I think that often um, in an abusive relationship, someone, the abusive partner blames the other person for their actions, right? Or they're hypercritical. You can't do anything right. Everything is your fault. Um,
Can you? I mean, none of these things really show themselves early on in a relationship. It's
sure.
only after the person gets comfortable.
Mhm.
So, is there an opportunity for someone to nip it in the bud, or like because the first time something happens, a person is willing to give that person grace. Oh, maybe there's been a lot of stress at work. Oh, maybe there's something, like so. Can you talk about like in the beginning of a relationship when those first red flags appear, how it seems pretty easy to I don't, the word ignore is not ignore, but like slough them off in some way, like
Sure,
I'm
sure. Yeah, I
aware
think it's,
this happened, but he didn't mean it or she didn't mean
yeah,
it.
it's certainly easy to explain them away. I think it comes back to the communication around it and your boundaries, right? So I think that sometimes we don't always realize like where our boundary is on some of these things until something butts up against it. And it doesn't necessarily feel comfortable to like assert that boundary with someone else, but it is really, really important. And I think that ultimately in a healthy relationship, your partner doesn't like want to hurt your feelings,
Mm.
right? Like, so if you were in a place where you can say, I don't like, I don't feel great about that, like I don't really like that, and they can take that in, apologize, do something different, like that is one thing. If the reaction is it's your fault, it's defensiveness, if there's not room for like communication around it, I think that is where it becomes more of a red flag. So I do think that it is important to like recognize your own feelings, recognize your own boundaries, and communicate those early on. You don't have to wait until things are horrible or you feel really bad. Something feels icky to you, that's important to say. And your partner's reaction to that is information for you to kind of know how to move forward. Because again, I think that, one of the things that we know is common as like a characteristic of a violent partner is that they don't really um, they're not great at like taking responsibility for things, taking accountability, and displaying remorse, right? So they might, if they hurt your feelings, it might not be something that they're super apologetic for. Like, that's your problem. Like it was just a joke, and if it hurt your feelings, then like that's on you, right? That's not the sort of compassion that you want from a partner. So I do think that nobody knows totally like all the things that are going to push our buttons, right? So it's not fair to expect that. So certainly there will be times, right, that maybe your partner says something that upsets you or does something that upsets you, because we are all just different people and can't read each other's minds. But if you're able to communicate about that and then they keep doing it or they do it more, like that is something that you want to be concerned about.
So what are some other red flags and signs that are warning signs that a relationship might be going into an unhealthy way?
Sure. I think if you have a partner that is excessively jealous, maybe they're constantly accusing you of being unfaithful. Um, they want to, know everybody you're talking to, and like look at all of your text messages, and you kind of have to account for your whereabouts at all times. Like that can be a red flag. That can be a sign of potential, like someone seeking like control there. I think a thing that I hear a lot is someone that's kind of extremely moody, maybe in a way that's like not predictable. So you don't really know what's going to set someone off. Walking on eggshells is a term that I hear a lot. So if that's, you're in a place where it's like, I don't even know, it feels like you're walking on a minefield, and if you say the wrong thing, there's going to be a blow up. Like that's not like a healthy place to be in a relationship. Isolating you from your friends and family. And this again is another thing, I think, to Rosalia's point, that can start subtly, right? So if you have a partner that's maybe like, and again, there's nuance to this, but I think if you have a partner that's maybe encouraging you to like not communicate with your friends or family, they maybe have a lot of negative things to say about them, that seems like it's trying to make you like not keep talking to them, not keep interacting with them, like that's something to like look out for sure. Because again, that's a common tactic, like isolating the person, because then they don't really feel like they have somewhere to go once abuse starts. If someone is generally like acting kind of dominating and controlling, they take control of things like finances, and maybe you don't have access to them, or you don't get to make any decisions around money or other things, right? Maybe they try to control like where you go, who you see, what you wear, what you eat, things like that. Those are big red flags for someone being controlling. Sometimes things they say, threatening things, right? If you don't do X, I will do this, right? Like that's a threat. Sometimes like manipulative things. I love you, but insults, demeaning, talking down. If they destroy your property or things you care about, sometimes I think that's a thing that people miss, right? Like, oh, my partner just like gets so angry and they just destroy things and don't have any control. But then if you kind of look at the things that were destroyed, and it's your things and not their things. That's something to look out for. Sometimes if someone's just like refusing to communicate, they withdraw affection and it feels like kind of like a punishment. These can all be signs of at least like a kind of unhealthy space in a relationship.
Sort of like the silent treatment, which is a way to withdraw communication and withdraw affection and withdraw their emotional selves while maybe being there present, which is even more hurtful.
Yeah. And sometimes that's, like I was saying, sometimes people feel like they're walking on eggshells and don't know what's going to set someone off into like an outburst. And sometimes it's the opposite end of the spectrum, right? You don't know what's going to make someone like give you that silent treatment. And then you're kind of left like, what did I do wrong? Maybe then you have to apologize for things when you didn't do anything wrong, right? They're waiting for an apology or something like that. So yeah, I think that can be a really difficult tool, like in a sort of psychologically abusive way. Sometimes people sort of initiate displays of affection with intent to harm or coerce. So that can be like kind of pressuring someone into sex. Sometimes it becomes like people start like sort of play wrestling and things escalate. Like they're doing something that is kind of physically harmful, but like under the guise of a joke, like you were saying, Rosalia. Sometimes people threaten to harm themselves as a way to be controlling, right? If you leave me, I'll hurt myself. Like that's another way to be manipulative.
That's a common one.
Yeah. It's unfortunately. So, I mean, that's like not an okay thing for someone to like put on you. And then I think, sometimes, like I said, people might be very jealous, might accuse you of being unfaithful. On the other hand of the spectrum, sometimes at the same time, your partner might be cheating, being unfaithful. Often those kind of go hand in hand, that people who are doing that accuse their partner of doing that. But yeah, I think that in general, some characteristics we see in violent partners, one is being charming. And I think that speaks to what you were saying, Rosalia, that a lot of these like negative behaviors aren't necessarily visible at first because people can be charming, right? They can seem really nice and maybe say the right things. And also, even if they're doing these things maybe at home, everybody else sees a different face. I think is the experience I hear about a lot, and that can make it hard.
Well, I was thinking of love bombing in the beginning of a relationship, which gives or gives the person who's being love bombed no chance to recognize it or like react in a healthy way. What is a healthy way of reacting when you see these subtle signs?
Sure. I think that it's, again, checking in with your own boundaries, like what feels okay and what doesn't. And again, that varies for everybody. And, we don't have a way of knowing that necessarily in advance. But certainly, within yourself, if something doesn't feel right, if you feel hurt or insulted by something that your partner is saying, that's something to pay attention to. And I think it's important to pay attention to that early on, because I think, unfortunately, if you get into a situation where there is psychological abuse, part of what happens is that sort of internal feeling, that internal voice, we can start to doubt it, question it. So it's important to sort of hold on to that communication, like I said. So being able to kind of assertively communicate your boundaries or your concerns, your feelings. So if something doesn't feel right, being able to say that. And then, your partner's response is a thing I tell people in groups a lot. That's like data for you, right? You can't control the other person's response, but certainly it gives you information. And if you aren't able to express your concerns, if you expressing concerns, your partner flies off the handle, then like that's maybe something you want to consider when it comes to continuing a relationship. But yeah, and I think when it comes to love bombing, it can feel harder because it's not like negative stuff happening, right? It's a lot of affection. But I think the thing with love bombing is that usually it's sort of like a 0 to 100, right? So you're getting a lot of stuff like maybe way too quickly. And that is also okay to be like, this doesn't feel right. Mm-hmm. Even if it's like nice, if someone says like, I love you, like very quickly, that it's like, oh, that's nice to be loved. But it's also like, whoa, that's like very quick. And if you have that, whoa, that's something to communicate, right? Like, hey, it's great. I think maybe we should slow down. And if the person is not receptive to that, then again, that's information for you to consider if maybe this is the healthiest dynamic to be in.
So what are some reactions like for the silent treatment, if someone's giving another person a silent treatment, to end it, would it just be confronting the silent treatment or leaving, or what is the healthiest way to deal with someone who is trying to control you by making you, I don't know. I know that's a form of control, silent treatment, but yeah, I don't know how it works.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways they're controlling sort of like how the conflict plays out, right? We can't solve the conflict because I'm not participating. So you just have to sit there and kind of think about it and probably feel responsible, feel bad, right? Because if I'm not talking to you, you're like, oh my God, what did I do to make her not talk to me? And I'm giving you nothing.
And so it sort of shifts the power dynamic.
Yes, exactly. So the person who's being silent has the power. And I think one of the things that's important to remember is that like there's nothing that we can do to control somebody else's behavior. So like there's not necessarily, if a person is determined to engage in the silent treatment, there's not necessarily something you can do. The other thing to remember when it comes to boundaries is really boundaries are for you, right? So boundaries are about boundaries aren't a way to control somebody else. Boundaries are for me to understand what I can and will tolerate or accept, right? And if my boundary is my partner, I can't be in a dynamic where my partner refuses to talk to me, then it's sort of how you react to that boundary being violated is a little bit up to you. I mean, I think certainly one can try to engage. That doesn't mean the other person is going to engage. I think when it comes to communication, I always advise using assertive communication. So that means not being aggressive. So we're not like yelling, we're not insulting, we're not like you. Also not being passive, right? Because passive is like, I'm holding it in. I'm just gonna like let it all fester in here until one day I explode. Being assertive is about being straightforward, but still being respectful, right? It's about being constructive, but getting your point across. So like, I feel very hurt and confused when we have a problem and you don't talk to me, right? So that's an assertive way to address it, because you said what the issue is, you've said how you're feeling, and then you can also say, I would appreciate it if we could have a conversation. So you can make a request.
And you use I statements
yes.
rather than you. I feel
exactly.
this way when you do that thing.
Exactly. Because then that feels like less of an attack. It makes people less defensive. And I think the other piece too of communication is the listening part. I think sometimes we think more about the speaking part than the listening part. And when we're in conflict with our partners, we like have a lot to say and really want to be heard. But it's important to like hear the other person. It's not a competition. It's not a debate. We're not in a courtroom. There's not going to be a winner declared. Ultimately, right, if we're in a healthy dynamic, we want the conflict to be solved in a way that is mutually beneficial, right? So listening has to be part of that. And so you're actively listening, you're asking clarifying questions, you're maybe paraphrasing to make sure you understood, you're validating how the other person feels. Like those are important parts of listening. So I think that's all important. If you have a partner that's like giving you the silent treatment, to try to communicate with them in a healthy way. They still might not participate. And then I think it's, again, sort of where do your boundaries lie and what feels appropriate for you from there. If it's like making you feel actively bad to be in a situation where a person is refusing to engage with you, then maybe that's not the relationship that's best for you at that time.
Time to say sayonara.
Yeah. And I think, certainly we can try to communicate with people in a healthy way. We can try to give it a chance, but I think it's important to sort of know like a limit to that, right? You don't have to kind of exist in this dynamic until you feel absolutely devastated before you do anything, right? I think that the point of talking about these warning signs is when they happen to kind of tune into yourself, your feelings and your boundaries, and kind of communicate and take action at that time. Because you don't want to let things fester. Because it's harder too to like make change, right? Once you are sort of entrenched in a pattern like that.
So are there any scenarios where there are no warning signs and then some pressure-ish conflict happens and then that person might slap their partner or their spouse like right out of the blue? Would that like what would that there were no warning signs, there was just a definitive action, a slap. So how does one react to that?
So I mean, I think anything can happen. I think there's a couple of different dynamics that are important to talk about. I think that there are instances of like situational violence, which are truly situational, right? Like a sort of anomalous, it's not a usual day and something happens and things escalate beyond where they normally would. That is a different situation than I think the dynamic that we think of commonly with intimate partner violence is something called intimate terrorism, which is where there is sort of an ongoing pattern of like power and control. I think with that ongoing pattern, there's usually warning signs, right? Because there's a whole dynamic happening here. It's not just like a thing happens. I think maybe with situational violence, I imagine there's some conflict. I don't think that things like that happen out of complete nowhere, but there might not be the same like ongoing signs that there are with the intimate terrorism dynamic. So I think, again, it's important. One, like, safety is important. So like, if you don't feel safe, seek safety. I think then once safety is established, then you can kind of consider like what's happening here. Is this dynamic safe going forward? What, can we reconcile? Can we do some work on this to make it a safer dynamic, right? And like, we have things, for example, like Strength at Home, which like I'll talk more in detail about next week, or Strength at Home couples, that are interventions to help people who maybe are like, they're maybe the ones being aggressive. And for couples, maybe it's kind of both sides. But how do we recognize this anger or these feelings as they're coming up, and how can we address them differently? How can we communicate them differently so it doesn't escalate to that point? So I think a lot of what I'm saying, I think, is like, it depends a little bit, but I think that the most important thing is to sort of pay attention to safety, tune into your own feelings, right? That intuition, your spidey senses, your antennas, whatever sort of perks them up, that's something to pay attention to, and something to communicate about. And I think that, if you're able to try to communicate in a healthy way, then maybe there are things that can be navigated through. And sometimes they can't be communicated through, because again, regardless of what you do, you could be the healthiest communicator in the world. And if your partner is not, or is not willing to be, then unfortunately, like, that's not something you can change.
It seems all very at the same time subtle and obvious, and it seems like the most important characteristic a person needs to have, regardless of their gender, is a strong sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
Because a person with a strong sense of self may not be inclined to give grace that first time,
Mm-hmm.
something happens.
Yeah. I think that being in touch with your feelings and boundaries is really important. I think it's important in navigating relationships. I think it's probably important in navigating like anything, right? Romantic relationships, friendships, work, like anything. But I think especially in romantic relationships, having that, being in tune with yourself in that way is really important, because that kind of gives you signals, right? Your feelings are messages to yourself about what's going on. So it's important to be able to be in tune with those and like recognize the validity of your feelings too.
And what can veterans who find themselves in a questionable dating situation, maybe not marriage, but a dating situation or a cohabitation, what can they do where they're not exactly sure if they're in an abusive relationship? Maybe they don't recognize the signs, but something in them feels off. What can they do?
Sure. I think there's a few different kind of places to go, depending on like your level of comfort. I think that certainly sometimes talking to friends and family, like, and we all have different friends and family, and people have different, everybody also has their own thoughts about relationships. But I do think sometimes getting like a third party perspective, like, is this like, that like felt weird, is that weird? I think sometimes just a small check-in like that can be helpful. Of course, there's people here like me, like our like mental health providers. So if you have a therapist or counselor that you see, they're a good person to check in with, right? Somebody that's kind of objective outside of the situation, that maybe has some expertise. And there's also some great resources to look at online too. And I'll share some information. We can kind of put it in the comments. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is a great resource. You can call them, of course. But they also have a website that has a lot of educational material. So some of the stuff I talked about before about like the healthy relationship spectrum, they have a lot of that information on their website, and it's pretty easy. It's just thehotline.org. That's their website. And it's a really good resource, with just a wealth of information. And of course, you can always call them and talk to a person live to just ask, right? Like I review some of their data from calls they get, and some of the calls they get are just healthy relationship inquiry is sort of the category that it falls in. So certainly they're a resource that you can chat on their website, and the text information is there too. And you can call them. I can say the number if you want to put it in the comments, Rosalia.
Sure. What is it?
It is 1-800 799 7233.
And that's the number to what again? That's the hotline.
Yes, the National Domestic Violence Hotline. So yeah, it's a great resource. And of course, also we have like the Veterans Crisis Line, that you can also call 24/7 if you need help, or someone to talk to as well. So lots of kind of places to go and, kind of talk to all of the above. But I think certainly if you're having doubts, I think it's certainly worth exploring those and, getting some feedback, honoring the concerns you have. I think if you're having concerns, they are worth considering, I would say.
I was just thinking, for veterans who are not sure, there's the screening things, but let's say somebody just wants to come in or call, or what is their access, whether they are the victim of, or they're not sure, or they just need to talk to somebody about the situation, or maybe they're afraid it might escalate, because we all know it escalates. So what is the veterans access that they can to the VA Maryland?
Sure. So there is me. I will say there is only one of me. So, but I think I try to be pretty available. So I'm the Intimate Partner Violence Program Coordinator. So I'm a point of contact for folks. We have also like social workers in most programs. Everybody's assigned like a primary care social worker. There's also we have a pretty large and robust mental health department, and there are mental health providers within primary care too, that can assist folks. So I think that there's a lot of different access points to, if you need to talk to somebody, you're having some doubts, some concerns, some safety worries about your safety. So I think any of those sort of entry points, we can definitely get you the support and information that you need.
All right. Well, I think we covered just about everything. Dating can be a very fraught thing. I noticed that there's a big trend on social media at weddings and birthdays to push somebody's head into a cake, and it's usually a guy pushing the woman's head into a cake. So there's a lot of things out there that people are considering normal that may not be healthy. So any last words on what to look for?
Yeah, I think what I would go back to is what feels right to you, right? Because there are people that find having their face smashed into a cake to be a fun joke, and there are people that find it kind of violent, right? And whatever way it is, it's okay, right? So even if everyone else thinks it's funny, if it doesn't feel good to you, that's important, right? And you got to honor that. So I think what's really important, know your boundaries, honor them, honor your own feelings, and communicate. Those are really important in a healthy relationship. And they give you a lot of good information about your partnership and if it's a healthy one. So.
All right. The last thing I'm posting down here is know and honor your boundaries. If you have any questions, anyone who's watching, You can put them in the chat section from wherever you're watching, and we'll monitor it and come back with answers, and then come back next week at the same time, same place for the next edition. Lindsay, do you want to give us a hint about what the next topic might be?
Yes, we are talking more in detail about the VA programming, so the different kind of groups and individual counseling that we offer around the issue of intimate partner violence.
Great. VA can help. So thank you very much. And thanks for joining us. And we say ciao for now.